Morning, brethren.
Good morning. Good morning, John.
Give me a second to straighten out my skirt here. Appreciate women even more in Black History Month. As you guys know, most of those of you who know me closely know I'm from Greenwood, Mississippi. And I guess I'm starting to sound somewhat like a broken record nowadays because pretty much every time we have Black History celebration, I'm asked to say a few words, and most of the time, if not every time, I talk about the Civil Rights Movement and civil rights workers. Now I think, as I look back on the history of blacks in America, there is nothing that impresses me more, that I find to be more profound than civil rights workers and the civil rights movement. You know, we talk about going out of our comfort zone, don't we, all the time. But brethren, you know somebody who went out of their comfort zone? Civil rights workers. They put their lives on the line for others. They were humiliated. They were beaten. Some even lost their lives for others. That's going out of your comfort zone. Because you know and you desire to do and see what is right. So they impresses me more than the inventors. They impresses me more than the artists and creators. They impresses me more than any blacks. Because they put their lives on the line for us. They went out of their comfort zone for us. And so, as like all broken records, I'm going to repeat myself again today. I want to talk to you a few moments about the Civil Rights Movement and how it affected my hometown of Greenwood, Mississippi. What we saw there in Greenwood, Mississippi. Now, Greenwood, first of all, is a small town, about never were more than 20,000 people there living there. Now I guess it's probably about 13, as all of us tried to get out of there once we got out of school. But it's at the eastern edge of the Mississippi Delta. And the Delta is pretty much like the heart of black folk in Mississippi. The vast majority of us used to live in the Delta. Now we've scattered out a little more, went north, west. But the Delta used to be the enclave of most blacks in Mississippi. And you know, when you look back on the development of civil rights movement, in the U.S., and voter registration drives, which took place throughout the South, there were never what appeared to be as little success as there was in the state of Mississippi. And I have to be fair. You know, going out and voting was a hard thing. Extremely hard. Extremely hard. It was dangerous. There was intimidation at the polls. There were intimidation when you got back home. People, I know your employer. I know where you worked in these little small towns. I know where you live in these small towns. There were poll taxes, literacy tests. There were all sorts of various arbitrary rules to prevent people from voting and registering. And they had the white primary. That might have been the biggest because basically all the candidates were white. Mississippi was, in the whole South, was solid Democrat. And they were all white. And they were all, for the vast majority, for the most part, racist. And in the primaries, the established primaries, and in these primaries, all the candidates would be white. So if you could vote, who would you vote for? Who would you bother voting for? So a lot of blacks see no reason to go down there and risk my life at the polls, standing in line, and who am I going to vote for? It was a hard, hard fight, brother. But you know, without political action, without political involvement in a democracy, you get nowhere as a people. Nowhere. So these people, these kids, vast majority of them were kids, college students, put their lives on the line, came into the South, because specifically, I guess I should mention Freedom Summer, the summer of 1964, because, you know, the civil rights, different organizations looked and realized that there was so little advancement in the state of Mississippi when it came to voter registration, even compared to other southern states. So little in the state of Mississippi that in 1964 they focused an entire summer on working in the state of Mississippi. Over 700 civil rights kids, workers, came into the state to get voters, blacks registered to vote in the state of Mississippi. They even changed their name from civil rights workers and began calling themselves freedom fighters during that Freedom Summer of 1964. And you know, when you look at the overall results at the end of the year, you can't be too encouraged, because of the 17,000 blacks that they were able to get to attempt to register and vote, only 1,200 successfully registered. And of those 1,200, who were they going to vote for? You tell me. Well, they were all white candidates. And they were all racist candidates. That's that white primary. But you know, you might think, I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. You might think that that Freedom Summer of 1964 was not that successful, but really it was. But even though it might not have gotten a lot of black registered voters in the state of Mississippi, they were still able to set up over 40 freedom schools. Now, what was a freedom school? You know, they realized that our kids, our young people in the state of Mississippi needed quality education. They needed quality education. So they set up an alternative school system for our school program for junior high and high school kids, where they taught them read, writing, and arithmetic, of course, but they also taught black history. And they also taught them how to let's say the art of resistance, how to protest peacefully and safely. They provided them with a well-rounded education, and they were temporary, primarily during the summer. But they served over 3,000 kids, brother, in 1964 alone. And not only that, they caused the nation to focus on the situation in Mississippi and in the South, and with the lack of black votership, which encouraged the Congress to end a 7-week debate and pass the civil rights legislation of 1964, and encouraged them to proceed and pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And not only that, they established the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was able to get over 80,000 members in 1964. And remember, 1964 was a presidential election year. And even though, and this was a big thing, some of you may remember, I don't know, but the Democratic National Convention in 1964 was held in Atlantic City. And the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which had a lot of minorities, attended that convention. The regular Mississippi all-white Democratic Party also attended that convention. And so there was a big issue as to who the Democratic National Convention was going to allow to actually seat, officially be seated and representative, as representatives, of the state of Mississippi. And, as you can probably guess, the Democratic National Convention in 1964 refused to allow the minority-oriented Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to be officially seated. They seated the white, regular state Democratic Party instead. But that's the way it goes. But they didn't give up the fight. Every year, constantly, there was a voter registration drive. And every year, it gradually moved towards success. Now, I had some photos that I had grabbed off the internet. Gloria, I think for lack of time, I'm going to just skip right on through them. And not all of them, though, but I'm going to go to the point that I also want to talk about the March Against Fear. And I will want to show those ones starting with James Meredith, like the 21s. But I had some photos because Bob Dylan came to Mississippi in 1963. Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, they came and they got involved. They were there 3 days, there in Greenwood, and they helped with voter registration and also provided some concerts to the groups, the kids there, and the young people there. And of course, you know Pete Seeger. If you know Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan, they were big-time folk singers, and I love them to death. Bob Dylan is probably my favorite artist all time. But back then, I was only 12 years old, so I had never heard of the guy. And but he came to Greenwood, and they put on some concert. One concert out in the field, in Miss Laura McGee's cotton field, which is probably about 2 miles from where Rosie is, my wife, is right now. And of course, like I said, he meant nothing to me, so I didn't bother to go. But they did come down, and they did help, and it was great. And I wanted to show you some of those photos, but I want to skip those because in 1966, and this was important, James Meredith, who was the first black to attend the University of Mississippi in 1962. He integrated Ole Miss. But in 1966, James Meredith became somewhat, he looked around in the state and he saw how things were progressing so slowly. He decided that he wanted to take a walk from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. And he wanted to do it by himself, a solo. He wanted to do it solo, a solitary march. Because to him, he was just taking a walk. But he had talked to people about it, the press and everything to a certain degree. And he wanted to basically encourage blacks to get out and vote. He wanted to show them, yeah, it can be terrifying. It can be scary. But you can do this. You have to do this. Because it is the right thing to do. And so he didn't want none of the large civil rights organizations to get involved. He didn't want, because then he knew that, then a lot of, whites would get involved as well, that parts of these organizations and everything. He wanted no one, but he extended an invitation to individual blacks. I don't want to say single, but everyday blacks that just maybe want to come out and walk with him a little bit. you're welcome to it. Guys only. But he's intended this to be a solo walk from Memphis to Jackson, focusing on voter registration. And he called it the March Against Fear. Now, when he got started, when he crossed the state line over to Mississippi, he was ambushed. A white young man stepped out of the woods, shot him six times with a 16-gauge shotgun. But he didn't desire to kill him because he had loaded it with birdshot. And, birdshot is pretty much BBs. But it still injured him seriously. And he had to basically drop out or terminate the march. Just crossing over into the state line. But when word got around, then the major civil rights organizations began to get involved as well. And suddenly everybody came into the state. Martin Luther King came, Stokely Carmichael came, SNCC, Martin Luther King led the Southern Christian Leadership Convention, I think it was. But committee? Convention, I think it's committee. But anyway, all the major groups came, sent representatives. And you had a ton load of people, young people, black and white, coming from all over the country because they want to continue this march in James Meredith's name. And they did. They came down through Greenwood, lo and behold. On July the 16th, they hit Greenwood. Now the march itself didn't go directly south. It came south as far as Greenwood, and then it went west, maybe 35 miles over to Indianola, and then it angled back down southeast to Yazoo City and on into Jackson. So it was basically a 270-mile march all total, and it planned to take about 21 days to complete it. But they hit Greenwood around June the 16th. And lo and behold, and I have some photos to show, from when they arrived in Greenwood. They were being led by Dr. Martin Luther King at the time, and Stokely Carmichael, and we were out of school that day, and they basically came and they had a small civil rights rally at a park next to where we all used to play ball at all the time. And of course, I guess then I was like 15 years old, and I played ball instead of participating in the march. However, when when they began to have the rally at the park across the street from where we all played ball at most of the time, someone came over and reminded us to get off the court. This is something that is much more important. And so we all crossed the street and went over to the rally and participated in that. And it was interesting. It's funny the way things work. I can kick myself out now because even though Dr. King was there, and obviously there was a lot of people around him and everything, I can kick myself for not making a greater effort to at least try to shake his hand or wave, say something to him. But being human, you always think, hey, I got plenty of time. That's no big deal. But it's amazing how things work out. So they came there in the 1966 in July, and they basically spent the night there, and the next day they headed west toward Indianola. That night they also had another rally, and one of the primary speakers was Stokely Carmichael. And Stokely had gotten arrested around a little after sundown because they wanted to set up tents on Stone Street Elementary School campus, which I attended from 4th to 6th grade. And the civil authorities wouldn't allow them to do that. And Stokely said, I'm going to set up my tent, and if y'all arrest me, we're going to tear this town down. Stokely continued setting up his tent, and he got arrested. And so they kept him at the police station for a few hours, and when they allowed him to be released and allowed him to leave, he came back to the park for the evening rally, and he spoke. And he was filled with anger. And he delivered his Black Power speech. That was the first time that slogan, Black Power, had been publicly used. And he wanted to focus on the point that blacks had to basically acquire political power in order to be independent. And they completed the day in Greenwood. They were only there for a day, and I didn't attend that rally that night. I didn't, being who we are, kids are kids. But now I wished I did. But they left and went on over to Indianola, down to Yazoo City, and into Jackson. And relatively, it was a fairly peaceful march. There were some problems when they hit Canton and Philadelphia, Mississippi, which is the city where the 3 civil rights workers were murdered in 1964. They were attacked when they hit Philadelphia. But for the most part, it was a fairly peaceful march for a civil rights march. And by the time they came into Jackson, there were over 15,000 participants in the march. Like I said, Dr. King was there, Stokely Carmichael was there, James Brown was there, Dick Gregory was there, Sammy Davis Jr. was there, Marlon Brando was there, Burt Lancaster was there. Everybody was in Jackson, but in town when they had Jackson. A lot of people, and people would march a ways. I guess, you didn't necessarily have to go the whole 200 or so miles. You would march a ways, then maybe go home or whatever, and pick it up the next week or something like that. But everybody, there was 15,000 marchers that actually walked into Jackson to the state capitol, and they had a rally that night on the Capitol grounds. And so that was the march. Even James Meredith, when he was released from the hospital, rejoined the march there in Jackson. He was disappointed because he wanted to do it alone. He didn't want all the national media and all of the hullabaloo. He wanted it to be a solo march. But nevertheless, it was successful. And it focused a lot of attention on black voter registration. And that 270-mile trek from Jackson, Greenwood, down to from Memphis down to Jackson, even though they were marching, they still managed to register 4,000 people. So they were working as they traveled. They were hosted by the communities that they traveled through. The black churches fed them. They camped out at night, slept on the ground. Like I was thinking about Miss Johnson was telling me, when they used to go to the feast, slept camped out at night, put up tents or sleeping bags or whatever. But they made the trek, and it was a successful event. Now I just want to show you some pictures before I sit down, and I'm done. Yeah, I know I went a little over time.
It's all right.
Forgive me.
Come on, John.
From the march, starting with I guess number 20. Yeah. That's James Meredith. The next shot, Gloria, was when he was shot on the road, on the highway. And they were able, he had some people accompanying him, some guys were accompanying him at the time. They helped him off the road, and they were able to get paramedics to come out and help him. And next shot. but he was hospitalized for the majority of the march. Okay, that's coming into Greenwood. Stokely Dr. King in the hat, Stokely Carmichael in the shirt to his, I guess to his left, looks like. And I don't know the other two guys. One of them is Floyd McKissick, but I didn't really know who he was. Next shot, Gloria. That's in Greenwood. Now, Greenwood looks a little better than that. I know it looks like an old cowboy town, but that was on McLaurin Street. Now, McLaurin was where all the junk houses were. And so they were like little rundown shacks and stuff, you know, nobody kept them up. So they were on their way, basically getting ready to cross the railroad track to go and heading toward downtown. You see where that little kid is on the bicycle over there? That's not me, but Mr. Curtis Sanders had a barber shop there, and that's where I got my hair cut every month up until I was about 16. And thank God Mama let me go to another barber, because he would pretty much, he didn't put the bowl on our heads, but he would just, you know, you'd be skin all around the side. Next shot, Gloria. Okay, that's they're heading west out of town. Next shot, Gloria. And somebody who had some color film and took a nice shot. Next shot, that's Dr. King and Stokely. That's the night where he had the rally there in Greenwood, and Stokely Carmichael was giving the Black Power speech. You see, somebody was pretty excited. All right, so with that, appreciate your time, and I guess I'll leave you with, you know, like I said, I love Bob Dylan, and a famous line that he used to have in one of his songs. I'll leave that with you. He said that the one thing, the only thing that I really did wrong was I stayed in Mississippi a day too long. And I did too, but thank God, now I'm gone.